Hello. Okay, so here's a story. I'm going to re-record a talk that I gave last night. I delivered this talk for a group of folks last night on building autonomous AI agents and using all no code, all visual drag and drop programming, and how I built this system in 3 weeks that was a game changer for this conference that I went to. Unfortunately, that screen recording got hijacked by the projector, and so none of the screen contents actually came through. It was just me talking. And so while this is fresh and while I still have the motivation here, I'm going to just re-record this whole thing. I made a deal with folks that anyone who donated at least 20 euros to these guys, that I would give them a high definition screen recording. And we already had some people donate, so I feel bad. I want to make good on that promise. If you're watching this and you haven't donated, consider going here. It's just lisbonproject.org and then 747. So the story in these guys, this is an organization that's kind of near and dear to us as a group, Problematic. We built their first website 7 years ago. They're celebrating their 7th birthday. So I met them. They were one of the first groups that I met when I moved to Lisbon. And then I organized a thing as a part of Charity Makeover, which is now Problematic. And we built them their website that you're looking at. And so, so anyways, they do amazing work. They integrate refugees here locally in Lisbon, do a ton of benefit for the community and for these folks. And so if you find value from this talk at the end of it and you have not yet donated, consider going to lisbonproject.org and just giving them 20 euros for their efforts. Okay. Okay. So what this is all about, again, I'm going to give you by the end of this, hopefully you're going to know all this stuff. Basically, we're going to go through what are RAG apps, vector databases, embeddings, using Docker, Git, APIs, Postman request bin, N8N, all these tools, but also the high-level concepts of this stuff, and then just like the hard lessons learned during the course of that. I threw together this little syllabus, and this is what we're going to basically work through here. It's kind of in 3 parts. Obviously, I'm going to demo the app first, so you have like a concrete representation of what we're talking about. We'll go over this blueprint, how things fit together, talk about some of these concepts. We'll then dig into the actual specifics of the application. So I'll show you the guts of this thing. You're going to see, the underbelly, all the admin interfaces, all the tooling, the API calls, all that stuff, how it all works and fits together. And then we'll spend the last part, probably the last 15 minutes or so, just talking through this. And this is the meat of it. It took me 3 weeks. And from start to finish, literally zero. I knew nothing about N8N, about LangChain, about any of this stuff. I had a bubble application in place that didn't do the AI feature that I wanted. But I was able to bolt that on and finish this and make it all work for this conference. This is the conference that I attended here. It was called Hatch. So it's 3 weeks start to finish, and learned a ton during that period. And so I'm going to give you all those lessons. This is stuff that I just wish that someone would have told me ahead of time, and that I'm kind of surprised isn't out there in documentation somewhere. And then we'll end with the learning resources, just links to some stuff that was helpful for me. There were a lot of great questions asked at the event, and so I noted them, and I'll try to remember to interject them like when roughly they were asked, because people had some really good questions. And this may be a blessing in disguise, because now I'm able to like stop and think and like ruminate and give you better answers to these questions. So that's what we're going to do here. And apologies about my voice. I'm getting over a cold and so I'm a little stuffed up, but it is what it is. So, okay. I guess first, just why I think this stuff is so incredibly powerful. This was a talk I gave on Wednesday night, just like a 5-minute, essentially a commercial for what I did last night. It comes down to this slide, and it is basically like, think of traditional programming almost like those little reels that you put in a player piano, where you're giving it specific instructions and it's just executing exactly what you tell it to do. Whereas these autonomous agents, I almost think of them more like, Charlie Sheen in this picture. It's like having an intern or someone. You give them a goal and then access to various tools, and you say, go do it, just figure it out and accomplish this goal. And so, he's got the email and a Rolodex and a phone and company policies and, meeting notes from past meetings and whatnot. And so you have access to all these tools, and then you just say, go, this is my goal. This is what I want you to accomplish. Go get leads for me. Go do whatever. But this is the difference between traditional programming and these AI agent apps. And I'm going to show you a concrete example of how this works. Okay, so let's go to the syllabus. I'll demo now the app from a user perspective of how this works. Again, this was a conference that I went to. The context here, I run something called Problematic. So this is like my passion project at this point. I'm basically retired, and I just work on this because it's the biggest thing I can think to build at this point. And the vision here is that I've been running these events in Lisbon. We've done a number of them. They're like little hackathons, but they're a very specific format where we validate the idea and then we attempt to build what we validated at our build days. And so I run these events, and I built the software that we're using to manage the events. And then I made it possible for anyone to use this to, it's like almost like Wikipedia. It can be extended. It can be taken to a new city. You can add problems and projects and bounties and all this stuff. So I wanted something very specific. So there was nothing that existed like this. So I had to build this from scratch, from the ground up, using no code. I got invited to this conference. It was like a global summit. They do these once a year, have a bunch of kind of change maker type people there. Really neat event. And they saw what I was doing and they said, can we use your platform? Can you make it look like Hatch? And we'll use it because in their words, they said, we're great fire starters. We're terrible fire tenders, were their words. And meaning like they're great. They bring all these people, they get them inspired. There's like all this energy and like crazy collaborations promised. But then in terms of what comes out on the other side, they're not so great at shepherding those to, outcomes. And that's exactly what this software is designed to do. Like my system basically tokenizes projects, and it makes it possible to kind of break out like what are all the tasks that need to be done, standard project management. But then it's really interesting in that it's signed, there's like token values assigned to each of these tasks. And so each one of these projects then has its own little cap table associated with it where people earn tokens in the project by executing whatever these tasks are that need to be done. And it shows who's done what on the project and how many tokens they've earned for those rewards. And then there's a whole bounty, cash bounty, crowdfunding, payout system associated with it. Anyways, they wanted this system to use for their conference, but they wanted to brand it as their own. So I said, okay, sure, I can do that. And so that's what I did. So I basically made it so you just literally append ref equals Hatch. And now the system, it white labels it. They have control over what stuff is displayed. It shows just their members. And so, so it basically made them their own little impact portal that they got to use. And each one of these people has their own profile. You can go in and look at them. So I made that work. And then I still had time before the conference. And I said, well, what else could I build that would just make this like a game changer, like truly add value to the conference and change how people interact with each other? And about that time, I was playing with this tool, N-A-N.io. I was playing with this and was really intrigued by this concept. So they have native LangChain integration. LangChain is its own whole thing based in Python, and it's a way of it's an abstraction layer of dealing with LLMs and being able to invoke ChatGPT programmatically from within an app. So I was fascinated that this gave me a visual interface for being able to invoke this thing and start tinkering around. And long story short, I was able to build what I wanted, which is, hey, when I go to this conference, I just want to know who I should meet. There's 134 people going to this thing. Who are the 5 that I absolutely must not fail to have a conversation with? In this, I said, this is basically, how do we not leave serendipity to chance at this conference? And so what I envisioned was, what if we can make these little baseball cards for each person? So when you go to their profile, it'll say, Steven, this is his bio, and boom, Steven, this is who you should meet. You can help these people. Your superpower of thinking about large systems, blah, 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 can contribute. And these people can help you. Her expertise in synthesizing, blah, 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 driving your East Side movement. So highly calibrated, what it knows about Steven. This is what made this interesting. We had a whole Google sheet of rich data on each one of these people. Hatch did. And so I was able to write an import routine that took that Google sheet and brought all these people's data in here. So they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to sign up to my system. Hatch already had all this data. But I indexed all that and then use this whole technique that I developed to have the LLM make some decisions on, who was a good intro and why. So this is what I'm going to show you guys now. And yeah, so that's the front end of the application. If we log in, I'll sign in as, I had two profiles here, but I'll sign in as my Hatch profile. And because I'm an admin across everyone, I now have these. So if I was signed in as Steven, I would also have this because I can generate intros for myself. But because I'm an admin across everyone, then I have this capability to generate new intros. So let's just see what happens. So when I hit this, it's going to go out. It's going to do its thing. In N8N, I'm going to log into my instance and show you what's actually happening behind the scenes right now. And you can see it's running this thing, return X number of intros, query Superbase. This one failed. Let's see what happened there. Interesting. Okay, so it generated an intro to me here. Anyways, this is what it does though. When you run that thing, it generates these cards, and they're off by default. I would have to publish this to make it visible on his profile. But if we're logged in as him, you're not going to see any of this because those aren't published. But anyways, that's what it's doing in the background. What I'm now going to take you through is all the underbelly guts of what does this. What would, like, show me the logic, show me the sequence of events that happens in this application to get this result. Okay. All right. So at a high level, what we just did is me coming to the website. This is a Bubble application. So Bubble, if you don't know, it's one of these no-code builders, and there's a couple out there like Flutterflow and Didify and Plasmic and AppGyver and Webflow, and like there's a bunch of options here. So this is just the one that I settled on. I've learned it fairly extensively at this point, and I recommend it. But this is what our whole application is built in. And so if you go to this page, we'll look at where we just were. Oops, remember. And find that button. Okay, so this is what I just clicked. And you'll see that the workflow that we just invoked, where is it? It just made this API request. So this is calling the API here. I'm using something called in Bubble, it's the API connector. And so we'll look at this. Basically shows you, these are all the 8 different APIs that I've set up. N8N is what I'm using. This is kind of like the middleware here. And so this is the call that I'm making right here. I'm passing that information in to N8N via this API call right here. Okay, so this is invoking the request. Let's go look at it. Return X no intros. And this whole pipeline, we won't like step through every one of these things, but basically it's waiting for an API request to hit here. It gets that, it's going to convert the variables that it receives to these local variables. I'll explain at the end why I do that as a good practice, because it's this is one of those best practices that I learned the hard way, but this is a useful step. It's going out, it's getting pages associated with this person, it's aggregating that into a single file that it can use, and then we're building a prompt here. And so this is literally what we're going to feed the LLM. So am I jumping the gun here by doing this? Yeah, well, to finish this high-level conceptual sketch. So Bubble app, making a request to N8N. N8N is then fielding it to this AI agent here. And the agent is using the tools that it has available to it. So it's being able to query this vector store that has all of our members in it, and then use the LLM to make sense of that and to actually write intelligent intros based on that. And then it funnels it back through the chain, through the Bubble app, and it returns those results to the visitor. Okay, And then I guess before we get into the weeds here by showing you all this stuff, let's talk about a few high-level concepts. So those are the big pieces here. I'm using Supabase is the vector store, OpenAI is the LLM, LangChain is this abstraction layer that gets a lot of hatred on Reddit. There's a lot of people who say it's worthless. I think it's actually very useful. Not the least reason being that I wouldn't use it otherwise. Like, I'm not a Python developer, and so had there not been this native integration with a tool like this, I would just never even be doing this to start. So it's useful for that, but it's also useful just because you can hot swap out the LLM that's used. You could just as easily say, give me a different model. Like, let me use a different LLM here. So it's very useful for that. Vector store database. I'm not at all a computer science person, so I'll give you my understanding of it, and this is probably way off, but it's basically, it allows you to do these similarity searches. So it turns, it makes semantic meaning. It takes like a sentence or paragraph or profile, and it's able to make a mathematical representation of it. It's this long string of numbers. I'll show you what they look like here in Supabase. And for the life of me, I don't know what these numbers actually represent. I don't think, no one has given me like a sensible definition that says like, these are exactly what these numbers mean. So it's some kind of magic that it's doing when it runs it through the LLM. It does what's called an embedding, which is somehow it's using like the neural net and everything that it knows to then give you this like string of like 100 really highly precise numbers. And that these are like basically coordinates in space. Think of it like 100 dimensions here. And like if this was an X, Y, Z coordinate, you know, take that out 100 dimensions. It's giving you these very precise coordinates in this crazy neural network. And then it's able to calculate like distances amongst those points. And that represents profiles that are similar. That's my understanding of it. So anyway, so these are all the user profiles in Supabase. This is what I'm using for the vector store. There's other things like Pinecone and other options. But the reason we use this, like ideally, if the LLM had an infinite context window, we could just push all these profiles in there and then ask it everything we want to know. But because there are limits on, like it would cost us a fortune, and I don't even think OpenAI supports that large of a context window yet. Because of that limitation, we have to do this essentially like this pre-step prior to being able to use the LLM. We basically have to go do like this retrieval. And I like, for anyone who remembers the Dewey Decimal System, this is the analogy that I came up with. It's almost like, you know, now if you go into a library, you just go to the computer and say like if you're looking for a physical book, you're like, this is what I'm looking for, and it tells you where to go. Back in the day, there was this thing called the Dewey Decimal System, where it was a card catalog. Literally, you would walk up to this like little file cabinet with all these little index cards in it. You'd find the number that corresponded to the area, like the realm of subject matter, and that would send you to where you need to go in the library. So you have to go to the area first to figure out then, oh, what are the books in this section? And so embeddings are kind of like, to me, they're like, embeddings are to text what the Dewey Decimal System is to books. It's this pre-step. We have to kind of go figure out what realm and then give me the actual books in that realm, if that makes sense. But that's essentially what a RAG, when you hear RAG app, this retrieval augmented generation, it's this two-step process of first doing the search in the vector database to pull the relevant documents, and then do this secondary step using the LLM to parse through those documents and make sense of them. So that's what we're doing conceptually here. In terms of the infrastructure, this is all running. This is what's really cool. Is N8N is a tool I discovered that is open source. Like, so this is, you know, if you're familiar with something like Make or Zapier, it's functionally the same thing. It's like a pipeline workflow management kind of thing where you can invoke all these different systems, and it's like glue, and you can automate stuff. But this is all hosted on my own system. You can see this is hosted on a server that I control. And I'm using Google Cloud to run this. It costs me $8 a month. And then I run it in a Docker container. And so I'll show you a little bit of that. It's kind of tangential to like the core of this. This is more like infrastructure stuff, but this is also really powerful stuff to know. And this thing, Portainer, is super useful. I discovered, a buddy of mine turned me onto this. This is like a web management interface to managing Docker containers, and it makes it so much easier. I am not a coder, as I said. Like I was a developer many years ago, and I'm terrible, and I hate code. I hate text and minutia and just the details of it. So having like a GUI for managing this stuff is a godsend. So we'll look at that at the end. And the value of running your own infrastructure, you know, because you can argue like SaaS has a lot of advantages. You just don't have to worry about it. You just turn it on and use it. They do have a hosted instance, by the way, of N8N. So you don't have to run this on your own infrastructure. You can run it in their cloud. Philosophically, I like the idea of like an open source thing where you can take it and walk away. There's no vendor lock-in. You're not tied to using their service. If they jack the prices, you're not beholden to that. So there's just philosophically, I like the idea of open source and running your own infrastructure. So, okay. And then the value of using middleware, we discussed a little bit. LangChain, this idea, it gets a lot of heat. Like I said on Reddit, they say it's just this thin wrapper of OpenAI. Why use it? Why not just make direct calls to OpenAI? To me, the value of being able to hot swap out the LLM is priceless. Like, talk about vendor lock-in. Like, this gives us the ability. We don't have to re-architect anything. We can literally just pick a different LLM, send a Mistral or a Llama or Claude or whatever the next thing is, Gemini. You can swap that out here. That's hugely powerful to be able to do that. And then you can start to do A/B testing and tune it and whatnot. So for cost and for freedom and options, I think that's priceless. And then lastly, REST APIs. I'm going to kind of assume that you have some exposure to this already. We'll look a little bit in Bubble and see how that works, how these calls are generated and whatnot. But REST APIs, the two tools that I really like for debugging and working with this stuff, Postman is obviously, or not obviously, but this is like the main thing that most people use. There is now a free thing called Use Bruno. This is like the open source equivalent of Postman. So again, if you're an open source fan, consider switching to this and using this tool. It's basically just as good at this point, and it's yours. So, so that's for being able to emulate requests and make API calls. And then for the other side, the receive side, there's this thing called Pipedream that's really useful. It was formerly Request Bin, now Pipedream, but you can basically like create this catch hook and then send stuff to it, and it lets you examine the payload. And so these two tools, being able to send and being able to receive and debug in real time, super useful when you're working with APIs. Okay, so that's conceptual section here. I think at this point we did have some questions. One was, what was the real value that people were getting from this app? Like, this was kind of just high level, like, why did you even build this thing? Couldn't they just meet at the conference? I don't understand. So let me just play a little segment. I just had this guy on my podcast. He's awesome, animator from Disney, Dave. I'm just gonna play you his response to that question because I think this is brilliant.
And I will say, thanks in large part to one of the things that you created for Hatch, which was that website and web portal that allowed us to connect. Like Sean made this portal where we all input our profiles into it, and then he had a little AI level on it that took all of the profiles, all the information, and then matched us up with other people who the AI felt were on congruent paths with us, so that we could actually know who to connect to. And I thought that was amazing. Like you'd be sitting in a thing and somebody, you'd introduce yourself, and I introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, my name's India." And I go, "Nice to meet you." "Oh, wait, India, I'm supposed to meet you." How cool is that?
Okay, so that's in Dave's own words. That's the value of this stuff. It's just like being able to sit down. I'll just pull up Dave's profile just to show you what he's talking about. Being able to sit down and you're like, oh, I already, the AI told us we should talk to each other because, we have this in common, blah, blah, blah. As co-founder of Latro, you could be a valuable, blah, blah, blah. So that's the value. It's like this icebreaker. It's finding common ground. It's kind of skipping past the BS, small talk, where what do you do? What do you do? Where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. Like all the nonsense at conferences. it gets to the meat of it, and it's like just this: how do we jump ahead of all that stuff and get to the meat immediately? So I think that is the real value of it. So that's the answer to that question. Is it overkill to use autonomous agents when you could just do a simple matching algorithm? So yes, you can argue that, look, we already, like, prior to these AI agents, could we deliver this exact same thing just by constructing it manually and, doing the traditional programming approach to this? Absolutely. The reason for this, I mean, partially it was I really wanted to play with this stuff, and I think it's powerful, and I just wanted to see if it could do it. So it was experimental, but also it future proofs it. Like, this is the real answer to this question is that this is one tool that I registered, like the ability to look up in the member database and see, show me the profiles. Like, based on what we know of these other people, I can say, AI agent, you're the host of a conference. Your goal is to propose blah, blah, blah. You have access to this member retrieval tool. So I'm just basically telling this thing, look, you're the conference organizer. You have the ability to look up people that are attending, make the best intro you can. Right? So that's like a weird way, like this whole goal-oriented approach. Why did I do it that way? The answer is because I can register other tools. I can say, look, here is, here's their LinkedIn. Here's a Slack bot to be able to interface with blah, blah, blah. It's like, I can register literally, here's a calendar. If you want to find time on these people's, here's a interface to get access to their calendars, so you can then choose the most optimal slot and book them an intro when appropriate, right? So the point is, yes, for this specific use case, this might be an overkill way of doing it, but it future proofs it, and it makes it possible to do all these amazing things down the road. And it was just a learning opportunity. It was a chance to go see if I could do this and make it work. So that's the answer to that one. Cost for running these, I'll just address this one, then we'll move on. So in terms of the cost that we're talking about here, so I am on the Bubble plan. What is it? I think I'm paying for the professional plan, so I pay $142. This is a legacy program. They keep trying to make me upgrade to the new version that I think is actually even more. So it's not cheap. Like, Bubble, they do have like a $30 a month program, but I outgrew that. And I needed the revision control because I had multiple people working on it, and so I needed the ability to basically do like branches and whatnot. So, so I'm paying $142 to Bubble. I think I'm on the $25 a month Super Base plan. I'm pretty sure it's $25 a month to these guys. $8 a month is my N8N bill because I have that hosted on Google Cloud. And I think that's all the service. Oh, and then obviously OpenAI has its own like token, metered like token thing. And I think all told, I spent $20 indexing everyone and doing all the intros and all the requests and stuff that you'll see. So whatever, do the math, somewhere around in the neighborhood of like $180 or something like that, probably a month to deliver this. But the bulk of that is because I'm paying a lot to Bubble to host this thing. People had some different options there with cheaper services that they mentioned last night. I wrote down some links of stuff to check out, but like realistically, I built a massive application at this point on Bubble, so I'm probably not moving anytime soon. So they do have, so Bubble has me on the vendor lock-in, but the trade-off there is just like they make it so darn simple to build stuff that it's worth it. So, okay. So anyways, I'll do the rest of these questions at the end. Let's go into the architecture. Let's look at the actual guts of this thing. Okay, so we were looking at the button that triggers the workflow. The workflow calls this, and then basically what's happening here, kind of I jumped the gun showing you that stuff, but this is, we're essentially taking these variables. So it's telling us, these, where was it? So give me these numbers. There's basically two types of requests, like people that I can help and people who can help me. So I hard coded these values. I'm requesting 3 each time. Some of this has changed since I built it. I was dynamically changing these values based on the quota and how many they had left. Frankly, it's just easier to hard code them for now. But anyways, so we're sending an exclusion list. We're sending the ID of the person who's making the request, and then we're sending how many intros we want. And that is basically posting to this workflow, setting those local variables, getting the content for this person, turn it into a single thing. We're making a decision what type of intro, is it someone I can help or someone they can help, and then we're rolling a prompt as we go. It starts to build the prompt here at these conditional branches. So it says, if this is, so I am user ID blah blah blah, this, and it's using that, posting in that variable. Based on what you know about me, can you suggest X number of people who could most help me, blah blah blah. So this is like starting that prompt, and then this is building on it. So then roll that piece in the front and then add to it and say, please exclude anyone on this list, respond with a JSON object. So here's where we're telling the LLM, give me back this structured thing. Like I want a very specific response from you. I don't want a plain English response. I want a JSON object with these types of parameters and these values. Right? So take that, and then, so here's where I lied. I said it's no code. It's not entirely no code. So they have these code nodes, they're called, and this is one of them. So in this program, you usually end up with these JSON objects, and sometimes you need it to take a different format. You need to basically transform that object into something else. In this case, I needed an array out of it. The good news is, and like I said, I'm a terrible coder. I couldn't write this from scratch to save my life at this point, even though at one point I could way back in the day. But what the good news is ChatGPT is phenomenal for this. So I can literally take, this is kind of like, I have this window open basically when I'm working here, and I'll just have ChatGPT open and then say, look, I've got a JSON output below. I need to convert this to an array of objects. Can you give me a function that does that? And I'm literally just copying and pasting out of N8N. Like when I run this pipeline, it'll have the result up to this point here on the left side. Just copy paste that into here and say, give me a function that does this, blah, blah, blah. I see you want to transform, blah, blah, blah. And it literally writes that function that I then just go back in here and paste in here. And like 9 times out of 10, it'll just work. Sometimes you have to tweak it. But this is how you use the code nodes. And N8N does have some of this manipulation logic. Like this aggregate is an instance where it's taking a bunch and it's making it one thing. It also has the concept of split. So going the other direction, take one thing, split it into a lot of others. But sometimes it's just like a complex double nested JSON object or whatever, and you have to unwrap it. And the way you do that is through these code nodes to transform it. So, okay, so then we get to this step, which is the AI autonomous agent. We'll look at what this looks like. And so here's where you're basically prompting it and you're saying, look, you are the host of a conference. Your goal is to propose relevant introductions. I'm an attendee. Here's my profile. And now this is where we paste in that prompt that we just rolled from the previous steps. And then we give it a system message. And the system message is like the rule book or the instructions. You know, you're telling it explicitly what you want, and then you're kind of giving it like these, hey, these are the guidelines that you need to follow. And so, so here's where you say, look, autonomous agent, you have access to this tool, which you can use to go find people, find information on people, blah, 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 the intro rationale field. So here's where you give it very specific stuff. You must return only valid user IDs. Do not recommend so-and-so to themselves. Results should be unique. Rationale, blah, blah, blah. Don't fake it. Don't make, so this is where you're basically giving it all the guardrails of how it needs to operate. And then here's where you register the tool. So this is, and tools, what's cool about tools is this can be anything. Like, so they have their own kind of pre-built tools where you can like use these that are all integrated, but then it has this one, which is what I use. So you can make a workflow into a tool. So you can invoke anything that you can build in a workflow. You can treat that as a tool that you can call from within one of these agents. And this is where it blows the doors open on basically anything in this service, any service that you can talk to here. Think of something like CRM, I don't know, like any of these things. And there's like hundreds of these services built here, right? So anything you can do in a workflow can then become a tool that's invocable via an AI agent. And this is where like your mind should be exploding. Like, okay, this is how this thing is like Charlie Sheen in this picture. is literally just sitting at a desk with access to anything in the world, any service. You can hook up web scrapers and go get data that way. You can hook into telephone via Twilio. You can literally, this is how it becomes like this massive, all-encompassing, like can do anything. Hook it up to an AI model here. Like we said, you can hot swap that out. And then it needs memory in order to like remember what just happened and do the next thing and like have some context. You give it this memory, which is buffer memory is what I always use. I know there's other options. Okay, this piece of it, what this does is, remember how we said, look, I want back a very specific JSON structured object with these 3 parameters. So if you don't get that, it doesn't always work. So this is where like sometimes there's hallucinations. You can tell from that system prompt, this is basically what I built from trial and error. Once it like fakes some profiles and comes back with a non-real person, then I'd say, don't make up fake user IDs, blah, blah, blah. So, so sometimes when it does fail though, or it fails to give you that exact structure output that you wanted, it has this thing called the auto-fixing output parser that you can add to it. And all this thing is gonna do is it says, look, this is the JSON schema that I'm expecting back, enforce this. And if you don't get it, try again. So this thing will rerun it and then basically make a new call to, and this could be a totally different LLM. This is what's cool is you could say, okay, look, OpenAI failed at this task. Let's invoke Llama here or Claude or whatever. And same thing as I said before is like, you can basically, this is where ChatGPT is great because I don't know how to write JSON schema, but this, you just say, look, I need a JSON schema that gives me these things. It should be like an email address, ensure that it's a valid email address or whatever. And it will generate this and enforce it for you. So, okay, the last piece of this, you're gonna get out of this what's gonna be like a JSON object. And what you want is an array of results here. So again, this is just a function that I had it write that will unwrap that JSON array and turn it into, or that JSON object and turn it into an array. And yeah, and you can see like this was my ChatGPT from around the time when I was building this thing. And so you can just see all these questions that I was going to it to ask and figure out this stuff. The other resource that I'll mention while we're here is the N8N forums. Forums. Yeah, the community.n8n.io. Super useful. Very helpful people in there. A very powerful feature of this, I'm kind of jumping the gun because this is one of the harder lessons, but it's got the ability to paste in so instead of doing screenshots, I started doing screenshots and the guy was like, do you realize you can just like paste in that workflow? And so I'll show you what this is. And I don't know, I literally have no idea how they made this work. But this is the Canvas output from my instance. And so it works just like it. Like you can literally go in here and it's like being inside N8N. It's like being in the tool, but we're in their forums. And so this is a super great way to collaborate with other people and have them like examine what you're doing and look at the data and run it and test it and all that. So, so this is basically the way you do this. This whole thing is just, this visual workflow is just JSON. If I copy this and then say Visual Studio, paste this into an editor, you'll see so let's just go new, paste, and you can see that visual workflow is just, this is all the JSON that actually represents that workflow. So it's pretty incredible. Like that feature, it's rare that something blows me away, but like the fact that you can just copy paste this into a forum post and have it rendered exactly the same as it is in the tool is pretty incredible. So, okay. Okay, well, so this is, we looked at the workflow for processing. This is when you request an introduction. I'm gonna just kind of show you some other things here that this does. I added this feature. So once I made all of this work, then I said, I still had like a week left to the conference. I'm like, well, wouldn't it be cool if you had like the chat style interface to the data? So it's not just like, give me introductions, but let me interact with the data. Let me ask it questions like it's ChatGPT. So let's look at what that looks like. So now that I'm logged in, you see it opens this little chat thing up here. So if I click on this, I can say, you know, who are all the musicians in the group? And so what it's doing, it's going back out there. Let's look at these executions. So respond to GPT UI request agent based. Boom. It uses the exact same member tool that it queried here. This is what's cool, is we're building these things modularly, so I don't have to rebuild this. It's just using the exact same routine, and then it's responding here. And you can see now we're looking at an execution. This is also good to know. So the way this stuff works is every time an execution runs, it's logging it, and you can literally go back and see exactly what the data was at each step of the way. And so this answer is going to be in my window here, right? And so yeah, but like, how cool is that this whole thing, it's basically like you can now, if I wanted to ask more questions, I say, okay, great. Great, can you tell me more about the musical styles of each of these musicians? Let's see if this actually works. So in theory, this has context window, or like memory, so it should be able to know what previous interaction was and should be able to, okay, great, so it worked. And this guy was an amazing cellist, by the way, and composer. Yeah, so cool. So that is a super crazy, if you think about, like, this was a relatively small conference, it was 134 people, but imagine like something like Web Summit, which happens to be here in Lisbon, that has 70,000 people. Imagine being able to get like this level of interaction, this level of figuring out like who are the 20 people that I need to meet at a Web Summit. I think this is just, this is why I worked to build this thing, is I just think it could be such a game changer for these conferences. So anyways, okay, new batch of intros, we went over that. Superbase. So we didn't really look at Superbase. Let me just, I mean, there's not much to see because, like I said, this is just literally, there's one table here. Oh, there was a video that I will link to. The video, this was so super helpful. I want to buy this guy a beer. Derek Chung, thank you so much, because this video is like the game changer that helped me like really wrap my head around this stuff. And it was short, unlike the thing that I'm recording right now. This thing was 17 minutes, and he basically cloned PDF.
In this tutorial, we're going to be building.
And so I'll just show you the part of his video where he's setting up Superbase. It's somewhere, so you can kind of see him piecing this thing together, the vector store. And so here's where, where was it? Maybe it was previous. Oh yeah, so this is Superbase. You set this up, and it's got like this prepackaged template, these quick starts they call them. And you can see that LangChain one.
Inside here, I have a LangChain quick start.
Yep.
So I'll go ahead and pull that up. And there's some SQL here that I can initialize my.
So long story short, you hit run, and it goes out and it builds you the tables you need. And I didn't change anything. This thing worked exactly perfectly. Just the LangChain quick start in Superbase. Followed this video, hit run, and wired it up per the video, and it was flawless. And it's a simple thing. There's only one table here. And because of the way it works, like, you can store stuff in the metadata. You don't have to actually like make the relational tables here. You can kind of stuff it in the metadata. And then, you know, in my case, I do like Hatch would be a tribe, Problematic is a tribe, and I can just store the tribe IDs in the metadata and then do stuff with it. So really flexible, really nice. And just shout out to Derek Chung. Thank you for your video, because that was super helpful. Okay, I want to keep this to an hour, and I think we're almost there. So let me get to the harder lessons. I'm kind of skipping some of the management stuff. I guess I could have showed you like that GPT interface and what that looked like, but it's conceptually the same. You're using an API, you're sending a request, and it ends doing its thing, returning a result. It's actually not responding to the webhook. It's async. So the when you send it to the API, it's now doing its own thing. And then the API, when that request finishes running, it stuffs it into Bubble. It actually makes its own call to Bubble instead of responding to the web request. Okay. Let's plow through this last section here, and I'll just quickly go over these lessons, because this is really the meat of this whole thing, is all the learning that occurred here. So if I can give you one thing, just one takeaway from this, is build things modularly. What I mean by that is N8N in nowhere in their documentation really teaches you how to do this right. They have this concept of, let me find a good example. One of these, I think this one. Yeah. So they have these workflows that can be triggered by other workflows. And you would think that, okay, so that's how you make things modularly. You have one, like the master one, that can invoke these subroutines. And then that's how I avoid like reusing this and building it. The answer is sort of. Like, you can't pass parameters. You can't like black box it and send in parameters and have it return an expected result the way you can with webhooks. The good news is the way to achieve that is with webhooks. And so what N8N lacks in terms of this native capability to do what I'm describing and have like invocable objects with interfaces and expected, enforcing a certain format that you get back, you can accomplish that just by doing it as a webhook. So let me actually show you a different one of these things. I'm going to show you the routine that I wrote. Remember how I said like there was that Google sheet of 134 people, and then I just basically like iterated through that and imported everyone and created all their records. So this is the routine that I wrote, and I wrote it modularly to do that. So all it does is it goes to a Google sheet, give me the record for that person. We're basically going to loop over in batches, I think of 20, just for the throttling purposes, because Superbase was throttling me. And then we're basically going to go, and then here's an example. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to pass these variables. I'm sending it my dossier content. So this is a variable called dossier content. I'm building that dossier and I'm sending it in here, as well as like some things like name and tribe and whatnot. SDGs, blah, 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 all these fields. But I'm sending these in as parameters to another webhook. So then let's go look at what's receiving that. So this is the webhook that I'm posting to. So when that gets that data, it's going to then go create the user in Bubble. It's going to set up their social media. It's going to add their website, any links. It's going to build that dossier. Like, so add this as member content. And then these are all just other webhooks. So let's say like we're adding the dossier. That's a member page. So I'm invoking this and it's creating the dossier. So you can see how this is like this cascade of, when I add one person, it's doing like 5 subroutines that call subroutines in the background. And if I can give you any advice, it's like build your thing modularly, because it's a rat's nest otherwise. And there's just things you don't want to repeat yourself. Like a good principle in programming is this concept of DRY, do not repeat yourself. So as frequently as you can, you want to do DRY. Reduce where information is replicated, and only like, instead of writing something like 5 times, just try to write it once and parameterize it and call the same thing as much as you can. Okay. This idea of establishing local vars, I don't know if you saw in, let's see. So you see how I will do this. Is the very first step. I say set local vars. The reason for doing this is the other big tip I have for you, is that, when you start running these things and debugging them and whatnot, it gets, you don't want to just like, if you're trying to fix something, let's say like at this stage of the process, it's a pain in the ass to then have to reinvoke this whole thing and have it run through all these, OpenAI calls and member checking and invoking Superbase and blah, 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 just to generate the same packet that you got at this point. So instead, what you want to do is, let's go look at one of these executions and see when I got to here. Let's say that I'm actually still building stuff. I'm adding stuff on here. So I have this JSON. This is exactly the JSON output that I have at this point, which is very simple in this one. But let's say I was like doing more stuff. I was going to like stick it in a different system or like page somebody or whatever. So at that point in this workflow, let's look at it. So if I was there, what I do is I insert a code node here, and I can just basically say, look, paste this output and just say return. And so all this thing is going to do when I run it is output. Well, it needs to be in test mode to do this now. I'm not going to go through all that. But basically, you can turn off. You can just like literally go in here and turn off everything before that, and then just run it from here. And this is how like you really speed up your development, is because you don't have to like keep futzing with what you've already, like you don't have to re-invoke stuff that you've already done. You can just kind of treat this as a choke point and say, we're good. I've got the packet up to this point. Let's just capture it here and work from here on. And so this is just like, it's like a break point in debugging, basically. So this technique, highly recommend. And I have a friend visiting. Just gonna check one thing real quick. Okay. All right. That's that. Build up dynamic prompt. Use it. Set node. Okay, we went through this already. How to roll that prompt dynamically. Remember this. Like, so N8N has this concept. Both N8N and Bubble have the concept of. Let me find a different one. So these webhooks have a production and a test URL. And so when you're listing for test events, like if ever you find yourself like, why isn't this, I don't understand, why is this not working? Make sure that you're posting to the right URL, because there's two layers here. Bubble itself has the concept of like development versus live, and N8N itself has the concept of testing and production. And so it's like you have two different layers and two systems, and all that stuff you need to remember like where you're at and what's posting to what. And so if ever like an API call is not reaching, it's just you're not getting any data, check to see if you have the test versus the production URL. That would be my advice there. Okay. Postman and Bruno, we went over. Pipe Dream. I'm not going to go into using those tools, but just be aware that these are very helpful when you get into the weeds. And like, it's kind of a similar concept as that code block for, you know, a breakpoint that you can deal with. Like, if you just need to generate an API request and you know what it looks like at that point, you can throw it in Postman and just send it direct to the endpoint. You don't need to like rerun all the apparatus up to that point that generated that packet. We showed this. This is superpower, being able to copy paste into the forums. Showed you ChatGPT for writing functions and like JSON schemas, and I think I showed you this too. So I think I've showed you all the main lessons. In terms of where to go to get more help, this was incredibly powerful. Like, so if I can give you one way to come up to speed quickly with N8N, I'd say go do these two courses, and I'll link to this little syllabus that has these links in the video. So do these. It'll take you probably like half a morning to get through them, or you know, or like each. So probably like in a day, you could do both of these, and then you'll be up to speed on N8N, and you will have built something real with it. LangChain, Udemy. I did this course. This is the other end of the spectrum. Like this is super advanced mode. LangChain is Python based, but this was very valuable for understanding like the capabilities of LangChain and what. Because N8N is basically front-ending, it's giving you a visual front-end interface to LangChain, it's helpful to understand the underlying guts of what LangChain is doing, and then therefore this simplified way that we have interacting with it, what we're giving up and what this gets us, and like how it all fits together. So it was good for that. Already gave a shout out to Derek. His video is worth watching, 17 minutes. And then lastly, this is N8N's YouTube channel, has a ton of good tutorials and content and whatnot on it. So, okay. So lastly, I'll just answer the rest of these questions. How tough was it? Okay. So we showed this. So in someone asked like basically how difficult was it to get Superbase set up with the right data structure so for this to all work and wire up. And the answer is it was very easy. I just used that quick start template that I showed you. You go in there, find the quick start, hit LangChain, say run, and it just instantiates it, and it worked right out of the box, like no tweaking. How do you decide? Okay, this is an excellent question. How do you decide which pieces to handle in Bubble versus N8N? great question. It's kind of a judgment call, and again, I'm probably the wrong person to answer this, but my motto is, if it needs to happen, like if it touches multiple systems, like this, here's a great example. When I add new content, let's look at what it looks like when I add new content. Let's see. So when I go in here and I once people are all loaded in the system, they can modify their profile. Here's where they would do that. The interface for doing that is right here. And so this is the workflow that it's basically either updating or adding a new profile to Superbase. So create. So yeah, so it's posting. Sorry, what was the question? Sorry, I'm doing too many things at once. I decided which pieces. Oh yeah, which pieces they handle where. So if it touches multiple systems, if like in this case, let's say I delete a user, I need to delete their profile here and in Superbase. If it's something that's going to be basically like, I just want one thing, I'd say like delete user and then have N8N orchestrate that and be responsible to go out to all these different systems and make sure everything that needs to happen happens. Then I say it's a good opportunity to, or like it's worth the sophistication of creating a workflow in N8N that handles all that. If it's just a one-off and it's something you can do with one API call, then I'll do that just via direct API call from Bubble. But like that's my rule of thumb. I guess you could go overboard and like move everything, so everything is a web call to N8N, and the value of that is that then it preserves all these executions. You can retry them if they fail. You can go debug them, all that. I mean, this is a judgment call of what is worth the extra hassle. But yeah, that's kind of my thinking on this stuff. So great question though. Okay, last question here. Prompt engineering. Yeah, and I'm not like the ultimate authority on this. You probably want to go read more about this. To me, this is a lot of trial and error. I figured out just like how to prompt it with the human message, and then I find that the stuff that goes in here is more technical. Like as things fail or as you see weird results and hallucinations and whatnot, you give it guardrails in the system message. So basically, if it's a guardrail, it belongs in the system message. If it's like what you want out of it, if it's like tasking it, then it's in the human message. But again, I could be wrong, but that's how it seems to work for me. So anyways, that's basically it. I hope you found this useful. If you did, once again, please consider going and donating to the Lisbon project. Big fan of what they do. They're just doing a ton of great work in Lisbon, and we're very thankful to have them. And like I said, we built their first website 7 years ago when they started. So they're just we're friends with them. So, and last ask, if you enjoy this, the thing that you could do, come create a profile. Go to Problematic. Let me rebrand it to, so it looks like Problematic. Come back here, let's log out, and make a profile. You can test this stuff out. We're always looking for people to join our events. You can participate online. Any projects here that you want to get involved with, you can just join and start earning tokens in the project and contribute and learn a lot and have fun with it. So problematic.app if you want to do that, and lisbonproject.org if you want to donate to these guys. Okay, thanks for watching. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in a comment, and cheers.